Hello and welcome to A Wealthy Life. My name's Vicki. In this episode, we're going to talk about whether property could be your thing. Is property your thing? And I'm going to start by questioning everything, everything, I suppose, questioning government policy, questioning what we're reading in the media. And the reason for that is that I want you to start questioning everything. I want you to form your opinions. I want you to see through the veil of misinformation, of contradictory information, even, and nonsense, so that you can make better decisions, more informed decisions about what are the best actions for you so that you can be successful and live a wealthy life, however that means to you. And I'm going to speak about property investment as I think it offers the best examples of misinformation and nonsense, unfortunately. So by the end of this episode, you might be curious about property. And of course, if you are, that would be absolutely great. Please book a call and let's talk about your circumstances. But you're also definitely going to recognize the importance of questioning everything. Back in episode 21, I spoke about asking better questions. And this episode is going to pick up on those points. It's also going to connect back to the podcast last week where I was asking you, are you making excuses or are you focused on your own success? And this is very much about getting you thinking, getting you questioning. We're heading into autumn at this point, the last quarter of the year. It's absolutely vital that you're focused on your goals, your plans to make yourself successful. Whatever happens in the environment, whether utility bills go up or, we've already noticed fuel dropping back, or certainly at this point in the summer, whatever happens, you can be making plans now so that you can ride this wave. You don't have to buy into the negative stories. You can create the life that you want, a wealthy life where you can spend your time doing what matters to you most with those that you care about. It's the essence of life, I'd say, joy, happiness, doing what you want. So let's get real for a minute. The media and the government have hammered the property market for years. They've hit us with additional stamp duty, land tax, SDLT. There was the introduction of Section 24, which meant they limited the way that tax or expenses could be written off against tax, something that they have never done in any other business sector, and I think is appalling. But they're also constantly belittling investors. We've even got programs on the TV, haven't we, about slum landlords and nightmare investors. And if you really knew inside the property world, you'd see that it is full of decent people providing decent homes. And really what you can see, if ever you go into some of these council properties, or certainly private investor properties, private equity companies, is the situation those tenants is appalling. One of my neighbors was in a situation where they had a rental accommodation that was really, it's a council house, but it was managed through some scheme. The scheme is obviously focused on making money and saving money, as all investors are. But when I walked into this house, they had two young children. One was a baby, so getting ready to cook. There was no carpet on the floor, no lino on the floor. And while we might think bare floors are exciting and glamorous, this was raw bare floor. As a landlord, I would not be allowed to have raw floor for my tenants. I have to provide carpet or lino or laminate. And yet this council tenant was in that position where they had no floor. They also were riddled with damp, some of it to do with not understanding about airing the property, but also when I went into the bedroom to look at all the black mold that they suffered, there was no air brick, there were no trickle vents on the windows. things to allow the air to flow. Now, if I had black mold in one of my properties, my tenant could take me to the council and serve notice on me, because breathing in those black spores are bad for people who've got asthma, certainly bad in a household where there are young children. When we went into the bathroom had moved beyond the black mold into the pink, and they just didn't understand how to get rid of it. And it's because they were showering and keeping the window closed. There was no extractor fan, no fan that came on when you walked into the bathroom and the light came on. These are things that I have to do fundamentally. So why are we belittling the private property landlord when we are doing the best? And actually, maybe we need to be turning our eye to some of these private equity firms and the councils and looking at how they're treating their tenants. And if we come back to historical facts, all wealth has been founded in the control of land and property, from knights and lords of history to the wealthiest families, both in the past and now. If you look at the top 100 richest people, yes, there are tech companies in there, but they will all have massive property portfolios, either residential property or commercial, because they understand that this is a tangible asset, always in demand, something that you can manipulate. You can pull down a house and rebuild flats. You can convert a house into flats. You can convert a commercial building into residential, and maybe not so easily the other way around. But it is something, it's an asset that you can work with. It's an asset that you can add value to, that you can differentiate, that you can divide. It is not so easy with a share for you to differentiate the share, because the shares are issued by share companies. If you have gold and you divide it, you just have two piles of the same gold. You don't actually make more out of it. You can't leverage with a mortgage any other asset class other than property. Property allows you to take your £100 and split it out over 4 properties and put £25,000 deposit on each one. Not possible when buying stocks, shares. Obviously, trading is your time. You can't do this with bonds, and you certainly can't do any of this in the crypto world. And talking of property landlords, McDonald's, while on the surface is a takeaway business, is fundamentally a large landlord buying up properties where they put their businesses, where they put their shops, their restaurants. Metro Bank, relatively new on the banking scene, although there's a lot more of the online banks now. When Metro Bank started opening branches, they based all their decisions on the control of key properties in key locations in town. They wanted that asset in their portfolio as well. So why don't the government or those in charge want you, the ordinary person, to invest in property? Now, I don't know the answer, right? But why wouldn't they want you to make your money work harder through a tangible investment vehicle like property that, by the way, would also provide much needed houses in the rental sector where the council haven't been building and have failed to build and failed to meet the need? Why would the government want private equity firms buying up large portfolios, sticking them into pension funds, and they're not known for the customer focus? But maybe it's a question of lobbying power. Maybe private equity firms can lobby and influence decisions. Are they the ones influencing policy to shift out the individual so that there are more properties for them to buy up? All of this is stopping the average person like you and me creating wealth that will move us out of financial enslavement, work poverty, if you like, into financial freedom. It will move you from a position where you have to have a job to the point where you can choose to work, but you have an alternative stream of income from your property investments that provide you with the financial security, if you like, to make decisions about how you want to use your time. If we think about lenders shy away from guaranteed rental properties. So any sort of property that has got guaranteed rent, like if you were to offer your tenants a 3-year contract, that would be a brilliant idea as a landlord, providing you've checked them and you manage them properly, because then you've got that security of knowing that you've got 3 years of income. You would find it very difficult to get a loan. Why would you get a loan? Because the lenders want to know that when you fail to meet your mortgage payments, that they can sell that property quickly and recoup their loan. Okay, understandable. But surely a 3-year contract of guaranteed rent would ensure that you are going to get your rent and you are going to be able to pay your mortgage. So many of these decisions just don't make sense. And then more recently, in August of this year, the Bank of England is planning to reverse the affordability test. So mortgage affordability was something, ironically, where when the interest rates were really low, what we were doing was checking that, yes, you can afford the mortgage when the interest rates are at 1 or 2%, but can you afford a mortgage when the interest rates are at 5%? Perfectly sound when interest rates are notoriously low. So interest rates are moving up slowly. They're at, say, 2 or 3% at the moment for private purchases, 3-ish, not quite 4 yet for commercial deals. And they're going to remove this test when all of the other media is talking about how interest rates are rising. Surely we would want to keep in the affordability test. So why are we making this change? Because what you want is more people to come in to the property market, more people to buy property. And this is focused particularly on the residential homeowner market. Buy property that potentially they can't sustain for the long term. This unaffordable home ownership dream, is that really going to make a Labour voter think, oh, I tell you what, I'm going to vote for Conservative now because then I'll be able to afford a mortgage? It's more likely that these people will buy property, interest rate will go up, and then, yes, they might be in a secured period when they first buy of 2 years, maybe 5 years, but when they come out the other end, if the interest rates have risen, unless they've planned for this, they're going to be in a position where they won't be able to meet the mortgage payments. They'll either be under financial stress or they'll lose their properties. How does that make sense? Quick fiddles, quick patches without looking at the consequences. Now, I don't know all the reasons behind all of this, and I definitely don't have all the answers, as I said. And who does actually have all the answers, except for those maybe with the real power? And I don't mean the likes of Bojo, Miss Truss, or even Sunak or any of the others. Actually, there are people behind all of these decisions. And I mentioned it, those with the lobbying power, who is encouraging ministers to make these plans. Is it the civil servants or is it other people with power? And this isn't paranoia. This is the reality of the way government is. There are people out there whose sole job is to lobby, to make connections and put forward their arguments so that what they want becomes legislation. Why are we bashing the private rental market if there is not something else at play here that we can't see? And what is the drive, in the politest of terms, to enable people who can't afford a mortgage to get on the mortgage ladder? Is that simply because they know that there is so much pressure in the rental market that there isn't the rental property? But actually, if we're going to take properties out of the rental market to sell them to first-time buyers, all we're doing is shifting the problem around. We're not solving the problem. And the real problem is that we don't have enough houses. We live on an island. We have limited space. And all the talk of recession and everything else, and the effect, of course, of COVID and the slowdown then, but historically not building enough properties, selling off council houses to homeowners, all of this is fiddling with the stock. And when you fiddle with the availability, if you like, the supply of property, you increase demand in a way that you can't meet it. I just know this policy doesn't make sense, any of this policy that is going on. And if you go back to the sort of the historical phrase, the illusion that a man's home is his castle or a woman's home is her castle, but of course it's male dominated, so a man's home is his castle. That bears no relation for the larger part of the younger generation now. Let me explain why. And this was really the point of my third book. I've got one here somewhere, but I can't show it to you. My third book was called Property for the Next Generation. And in that, I spoke about how post your university, because that's where you're herded down. Young people are herded to go to university. When they come out of university, sort of in their early mid-20s, they are in massive debt. And this makes sense to rent properties because they don't have the deposits. They need to work, they need to clear the debt from their university loans, and they need to build up their savings. So renting makes sense. They're also in their first job and they don't know how this first job's going to be, and the first job might not be the job that they settle on. Because what we need to consider also is that jobs aren't for life anymore. The average person, according to a quick search on Google from a company called Zapier, says that the average young person in that first 8 to 10 years post-university will have an average of 4 to 5 jobs by the time they're in their mid-30s. And if that's average, that means there are some people out there changing jobs every 6 to 12 months. Now, these are young people that have been to university. These aren't people just switching around in supermarket jobs and things like that. Now, why is this important? It's accommodation again. Not all the jobs that the young people apply for will be in the same area. So people will have to move house. The cost of moving from one rental property to another is predominantly time, applying to a letting agent, transferring your deposit, moving your personal effects. And this is a lot less than if you had to move home as a homeowner. So first off, as a homeowner, you might not be in the right position in your mortgage. There could be some mortgage penalty for moving. But even if there isn't, if you own a house and you're going to sell and buy another, you've got estate agency fees. You've got solicitor fees, surveys, brokers, moving costs. You've got your deposit. You're usually going to move to a house that's bigger or in a different area, which means you're going to need a bigger deposit. There's all the lender charges, mortgage administration fees. There's potentially the impact of increasing rates, because if you change mortgages, you might move into an increasingly high mortgage rate. And how many times can you afford to buy and sell? You can't keep buying and selling properties. So unemotionally, it makes sense for a person to rent a property until they become settled in their career and their relationship. And let's just talk about the impact of relationships on property ownership. First, you're single, then you're a couple, then you're a family. All of these phases in your life have different housing needs. From initially single, you want to be close to the work, you want to be close to your nightlife, and maybe as a couple, you'll buy your first property together. But eventually, as a family, you're going to want a house, potentially a garden. Again, costs, costs, costs. What if there's a different way? Yes, some people will view renting as a waste of money, and I understand that. But we seem to conveniently forget that every house that you buy, residential property you buy, doubles in costs once you consider the interest that is compounded and added to your loan. All of that money is going to lenders, and we never mention that, do we? So when you make your mortgage payment, you know right at the beginning of any new mortgage, even if it's on a capital repayment, what you're doing is you are paying back interest to the lender. You're not paying down your debt. So how is that any different to renting a property? And say, let's that first 5 years, if you look at how much you reduce your mortgage debt, actual debt, it's very little. And therefore, why is that not similar to renting, where you're not paying down any debt at all? You're probably paying less. You're maybe living somewhere more convenient. And when you do have to move, you're not incurring all of these costs of moving all the time. So if you actually invested in property, and yes, it is a bit hard if you don't have your own residential to start, but then you can invest and buy property where it makes financial sense, where your money is going to make a greater return than if it's just sitting in a bank account. You may also benefit from some capital gain as you hold on to this property for 5, 10, or even 15 years, because you won't be wasting money on all the buying and selling expenses. You're going to invest your money and you are going to make that decision based on investment criteria rather than emotional decisions, that as you would with a residential property. And you are going to take in that profit from the rent when it comes in and all the expenses are paid, and you can use that money. The invested money can fund you to live where you want. It can pay your rent. You are then free to move within the UK after jobs, or even move abroad, knowing that your money is sat in one location where it makes sense, making easily somewhere between 7 and 12%, depending on the investment vehicle you're using, whether you're doing it in a personal name or a limited company. So why don't families buy investment properties where the returns make sense? Their children could then maybe be funded through university. They could live in rental accommodation that is paid for through the profit. And then when they're ready to remortgage, when they're ready, you can remortgage, you can sell the property and potentially even fund a deposit. But once they're settled, once it makes sense, this is something you could do. And while the government is talking all this rubbish about rental calculations to prove that you can afford a mortgage, or even the Bank of England removing the need for affordability, the temptation is simply going to be for people to buy more expensive property that they can't truly afford now. And if mortgage affordability calculations are not in there, when their current mortgage term ends, they come out, interest rates are higher. This is where properties will end up being, I don't know, either sold at a lower value or properties being repossessed. If this doesn't lead to financial stress and repossession, the purchase could just come along at the wrong time in your workplace or your personal life and just line you up for more costs. In terms of policy, this doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to introduce a policy to encourage people to buy property when all the conversation in the media is about interest rate rises, recession, a crash, a property market. And of course, all of that is going to be caused by media speculation anyway. So the conversation in the media will become this self-fulfilling prophecy, if you like, because what they say is going to come true because they're affecting those people that don't ask questions of what they're reading. They're going to just cause them to take this information at face value and make poor decisions. Where are all the stories of business booming? The property market right now is so busy, both on the sales side and also on the rental side. I know I was speaking to my letting agent. She said she's getting 100 people apply for every property that she advertises. They're having to change their system because they can't handle the volume of applications that are coming through to get a property turned around and out to a potential new tenant. There is a desperate shortage of rental accommodation, partly because private landlords are being driven out of the market with all the just going to start that piece again. Sorry. There is a desperate shortage of rental accommodation as private landlords are being driven out of the market by all the pressures that I mentioned at the beginning. And this is topped up with the fact that we are simply not building enough properties. So in summary, to spoil a perfectly good saying, while the retrospective government angels are busy fiddling, the country is not burning. I'm taking on new clients and helping them to build cash flowing property portfolios because they can see the benefit of a well-managed and systemized property portfolio that's both tangible, in demand, and generating more interest than they can achieve through banks or crypto or shares. I've used property as an example in this, but I could have talked about the impact on business decisions, where the media is talking about, business leaders not making decisions to invest. And then that's making smaller businesses thinking, well, if the bigger businesses aren't investing, I won't invest. When you think about it, if there is a recession, whenever the market is affected negatively, let's talk about that. It's when millionaires and entrepreneurs come to the fore. And why do they do that? Because they do the opposite of what the herd does. I can't think of his name. I can see his face. Classic American investor. He says, do the opposite of the market. If the market's not buying, buy. When the market's buying, then prices are rising. It's not necessarily the right time to buy. So you really need to see through all of this. And I think the most interesting thing that I've heard recently, it's currently August, is President Joe Biden was doing a talk to the media, and he refused to call a recession, even though technically that's what the financial bodies wanted him to do. He talked about the business success in the States. He talked about business booming. Why aren't we focused on success? Why aren't we focused on the current situation? Why are we hung up on this media statistic that in the past 2 quarters of negative growth meant? We've been through the most unprecedented time. I mean, even if we talk about all of the hoo-ha and upheaval of Brexit and how that's rippling forward, COVID in itself was an extraordinary situation where the whole world basically closed its doors. We know that there's going to be a knock-on effect from that. So how can we be using statistical markers from pre a life-changing and world-shifting event like coronavirus? We need new statistics. Maybe we need 3 periods of consecutive negative growth, or a year of negative growth before we call a recession. Because if you look at the States, one of the negative growth was 9, and then the most recent negative growth was 1.6. Well, that's actually an improvement of 8. But you're going to call a recession when things are getting better? It's not the numbers, it's the direction of the numbers that count. I just want you to see through what's going on. I want you to prepare. I've spoken to you about preparing at a very local level within your family, thinking about your finances, thinking about your businesses, thinking about your investments, thinking about the future, focusing on success, focusing on wealth, not listening to the media generally, not surrounding yourself with negative and justifying people justifying why they're not achieving what they want. In keeping with the last podcast, are you making excuses, or are you going to focus on your success? Are you going to make this last 3 months of this financial year the foundation of a successful 2023? You are a macro environment operating in an Uber environment. You can't control the Uber until you control your own macro. You are an important organ within this bigger organism, and we all need to be successful as our not our organs, but as an organ of this wider environment. We need to be healthy. We need to be operating at our best. And some of all of this noise is not going to do it for you. If you are determined to make a success of your future, I would love to help you. I think I've probably gone on well past my normal time here. I would like to thank you for listening. I hope I've planted seeds again. Last time I was mixing up the compost. This time, am I really just planting seeds, or is it more than that now? I really want you to see through the illusion, to think about whether property could be your thing, to think about the examples I've given you of how the government are fiddling around in markets and the media is setting the story. Is that the story that you want to be an actor in? Or do you want to write your own story and be the lead in your own play, your own performance? That's what I want. I am the lead in my own performance. Bob and I are writing our story, writing our roles in our wider story. And that's what I want for you. So thank you very much for listening, as always. I hope that I've given you plenty to think about and maybe some more whoosh in your life. My name's Vicki Whooshea, and this has been A Wealthy Life. I will speak to you again soon.